Sometimes it can seem impossible to trigger creativity. This is the big question. How do we make ourselves creative? How do we get ourselves to do something creative? And what does that even mean? This is something I've been thinking about recently, and I don't have an answer to it. But I do have thoughts, and I think it has something to do with time and boredom and putting time aside, giving yourself space. The writer Neil Gaiman says that when he sits down at his writing desk, he has two choices. He can either sit there and do nothing, or he can write. But he can't do anything else. Those are his two choices. Gaiman is giving himself the time and the space to be creative. So I'm going to try and do that too over the next few days. Put time aside exclusively for creating. Without pressure, without expectation, just giving myself that space, which I think so often we don't seem to have. A viewer once gave me some advice. It's advice handed down to her from her dad, and she said that there was a difference between urgent and important tasks, how we're always chasing after doing the urgent things. These always come top of our to-do list, but actually we need to focus on the important things, putting time aside for the important things. And I do think boredom, and I think space, and I think not doing anything is important, and yet so often we don't give that to ourselves. So this morning I woke up at 5 a.m, an hour earlier than usual, and I told myself I couldn't read, I couldn't consume, I couldn't do chores or organise, anything like that in this extra hour. I could only sit down somewhere with paper and pen, and I could sit there or I could write. I took Neil Gaiman's advice. So I did a bit of both. I sat outside, it was freezing cold, and it was early, and it was very dark, and the stars were still out. I looked at these, I listened to the silence, the occasional tawny owl. It was a bubble of stillness. And then I wrote, just in my journal, half poetry, half prose, impressions moving around me. And then the day started. But I had a strange clarity because of that time in the morning. It's like I could feel it the rest of the day, which sounds a bit strange. I just felt more focused. I had a pretty typical morning. I went through my morning routine. I got some work done. And then in the afternoon, I put time aside again. After lunch is a time where I'm not usually very productive, and I very rarely actually get something done. Often I'll just sit at my desk and try to get something done, but just not be very focused, and it doesn't actually end up being a very good use of my time. So instead, I sat back down with pen and paper, and this time I wrote a poem. Today, however, was slightly different to when I usually sit down and write something, because I was taking the advice of J.D. Salinger. At least, I think it was him. apparently he replied to some high school kids who asked him for writing advice, and he said to stop thinking of writing and creating as a destination, but instead to think of it as a process. He told them to write a poem and then to burn it. For no one to ever see it, for it to have been created but only existed very briefly. So I've been meaning to do this for a while, but every time I chicken out because I don't want to burn the thing that I've written. But today I finally tried it, and I spent about half an hour writing a poem that I was actually quite proud of, but I will never read it again because I burnt it. And it just turned to nothing. It turned to ashes. So often we focus on the destination, the job, the grade, the final product, but the process is the important thing, because that's the thing that we do. That's how we spend our time. I brought the ashes to my room and I set them to one side while I got back to doing some work for the next day. Didn't throw them away, I just left them there. I'd encourage you to try this too, kind of as a mental exercise more than anything. So there is another thing I created this week, but this time I didn't burn it. But again, it was more about the process, about learning, and I really did not expect it to be perfect, which it was not, spoiler, because I'm very new to sewing, but I've always wanted to make a sailor collar, and so I decided to do that today. I want to learn and I want to get better. I started by making a plan on Notability, who are sponsoring today's video. This is a digital note-taking app for your iPad, and they recently added a pencil feature which makes it ideal for planning creative projects. The pencil is pressure sensitive, which means you can sketch and add shading to drawings, just like I'm doing here. I used the colour pencils to make a frame for my initial vision board, so next I went on Pinterest and just put together a collection of inspiration photos. I also added in these digital sticky notes and sketched out with the pencil how I wanted the front and the back of the collar to look. Okay, so next I got out my fabric. I've got this really lovely linen fabric. I just sketched out a sewing pattern. It's very easy. I will link a video down below that I used as well. So this is the shape I cut out, and I just tried it on to see if it would fit. Then I cut out a second piece of fabric because I was going to sew these together. This is what most of the tutorials recommended, but honestly I don't think it was a good idea. I think I should have just hemmed the sides. And keep in mind, I'm very new to sewing, so this is not perfect by any means, and there are so many loose threads, so I think I'm going to go over it again at some point. And then I added a ribbon and pinned this in place to see what that would look like, and I much preferred this. It also distracts from the really bad sewing. So this is what it looked like at the end, which I think looks so much better. I love it with the ribbon. So now we're moving on to another day. I started my morning as usual. I read, still reading the Brothers Karamazov. I did some admin work for my stationery brand, Pumpkin Productivity, I updated my Goodreads, and I did some writing. I also cleaned my room a little bit because it did need a clean, especially my desk. I always get ink stains on the wood. And in the mid-morning, I was getting a little bit distracted by my phone, I must admit. Sometimes we just need to make space, eliminate distraction. I read recently that 3/4 of Generation Z think that they spend too much time on their phones. And the average person spends about 3 hours and 15 minutes on their phone every day, which is a lot. That's a lot of time that we spend getting distracted by social media, new media. We have so much access to content, and we can access content so easily that I feel that the balance between consumption and creation has become massively skewed. We need to make more of a conscious effort if we want to create something. It's not the default. Especially when you have work, university, school, where there's always something to do. And that's always going to take priority. It can be really hard to find that time and space away where you're allowed to be bored and you're allowed to create. Finally, for this video, at the end of this day, I took those ashes outside and I sat down. I wanted to turn it into something new, a kind of phoenix, if you please. So I turned the ashes into paint, and I painted a stormy set of fields, something that I could imagine in Daphne du Maurier's Jamaica Inn, or So I want to say thank you for watching this video. I hope that you liked it, and what I really hope is that you put time aside today to either create something or to just be, to just sit there and be and allow yourself to be bored, to give yourself that space. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope that you have a productive week. Actually, I say I hope you have a productive week, but instead I hope that this week you do something which is the entire opposite of that, and you do something which is not productive at all.